My name is Alisa. I am a consultant and a TA for LSAT Unplugged. That means that I get to work closely with Steve Schwartz. I teach classes occasionally on the law school admissions test. I can help you with everything from the analytical reasoning all the way to logical reasoning and reading comp. I also have the opportunity to lead and give and pursue interviews like this. Today, we have Ian McInnis, and he's joining us here from Michigan State University College of Law. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you and then open up the floor to you now. So Mr. McInnis oversees the day-to-day operations of the JD Admissions Office at Michigan State University College of Law. As such, he works closely with the Assistant Dean for Admissions and International Programs to build a diverse, well-rounded incoming class that is not only ready to handle the rigors of a legal education, but also passionate about the profession of law. Mr. McInnis earned his Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of North Florida and his Juris Doctor from Valparaiso University School of Law. He has been in law school admissions for 8.5 years, is a member of the Florida Bar, and a committee representative for the Law School Admission Council's Misconduct and Irregularities in the Admission Process Subcommittee. Welcome, Ian.
Good evening. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing really well. I'm so grateful that you're spending this time with us. And I know that a lot of our applicants that work with LSAT Unplugged, are going to be looking forward to this as well. I know it's going to help a lot of people out.
Well, I'm excited to be here and looking forward to answering some questions and obviously answering questions down the road for anybody that has any questions about MSU law.
Great. And I know that this cycle, you've been working at admissions for 8.5 years,
yeah.
But I think it's safe to say that this cycle has a little bit more, I don't know what the correct word for it is. There's anxiety around this cycle. There's sort of a collective, there's a lot of questions in the air, of course, with the global pandemic. Would you say that you're receiving more applications that in this last cycle and expecting perhaps more applications?
Yeah, so I mean, this past cycle, which, almost wrapped up. I don't call it wrapped up until our class starts, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks, but it's almost wrapped up here. But yeah, the United States as a whole, as far as law school admissions, saw an increase in applications of roughly 33%, I believe is where we sort of landed. We at MSU Law were up about 24% in applications this year, so close to that 25% mark. So we definitely have seen more applications in this cycle, definitely more competitive in this cycle because of the increase in applications.
Sure.
And so I think, it will be interesting to see how this next cycle for the incoming class of 2022, say that a couple of times fast, how it looks, right? Because I think, right, we're all hopeful that we'll see sort of the continuation of, right, the increased applications and sort of demand for law school. But I also think it's sort of one of those up in the air things because we also weren't really sure if we were going to see more applications this past cycle.
Sure.
So I keep saying it's been a crazy 1.5 years and we'll see how it continues.
Great. Yeah. Unprecedented for sure, but but from what it sounds like, a lot of people are going to pinpoint that word competitive. They're thinking that it's a lot more competitive. Right off the bat, I know I talk to a lot of applicants every day, and with that competition, I occasionally come across people that are sort of have this mindset of like it's more competitive, so I need to like reinvent the wheel in terms of their application. And I'm seeing you make a face right now, like can you speak to that sort of mindset, maybe loosely? I know it's a really loose statement.
Yeah, I think this is advice I give to someone who's starting law school, right? And it's something that once I started law school, and now it's been, 12 years since I started law school, but, reinventing the wheel, I think can get people into some trouble. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, but it depends on how you're planning to reinvent the wheel, I suppose. So, I think you want to stand out, right? You want to make sure that your voice is coming through in your personal statement or any optional statements, that you're telling the admissions committees as much information about who you are as a prospective student, right, an applicant. Um, but you also don't want to sort of go out into left field, because then we sort of sit there and question, is this person ready? Is this right? Someone who's going to be able to handle the rigors and be able to handle the challenges that are thrown at them, right, in law school. So yes and no. It's a I hate to say that, but it's one of
Sure.
those yes and no things. You definitely want to stand out. You don't want to be sort of basic, because we get so many applications that, right, if you're not standing out, then that might put you on that fence of admission versus maybe waitlist or deny.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely. I think the biggest key should be make sure that you are putting your best foot forward and that you're not just throwing something together at the last minute, because that is something I see a lot. We can tell if it looks like somebody sort of threw an application together, and that's not how you want to sort of be going into the process, especially when applications were up this year. If they continue in that direction, it's just going to make it more competitive across the board, not just at MSU law, but any law school around the country.
Across the board. Yeah, truly wise things to think about in terms of that timeline. And I don't want to put any ideas in anyone's mind, and we can move on. But like I'm getting the idea that like sort of like throwing like what an applicant might think is like a trick, or like throwing maybe something into a personal statement that maybe it's coming from a place of, aha, now I've really shown them something they've never seen, maybe isn't the best avenue if it's not true and authentic to yourself,
Correct.
and you haven't really, given it the time that maybe it deserves.
Right. Yeah. I think what you touched on right there, being true and authentic to yourself, is something that we look for in an application. And if you sort of go out into that left field, that might make some of us question, is this person being true and authentic? Is this who they really are? Or is this a show to try and make us, right, think that there's somebody who they aren't?
Yeah, this is definitely, I think, grounding. I think it's just a really grounding sort of like topic that I'm talking to applicants every day, and it seems like this is coming up quite a lot. This kind of collective uncertainty, the rise in applications. We have this unprecedented global event. There's a lot going on, and
Right.
rightfully so. I understand kind of that approach, but you mentioned, uh, I'm going to get right into it. You mentioned looking at a personal essay and wondering if this person, it seems like, comes across your mind, is this person capable of handling sort of like the rigor that a law school education is going to put someone through? So that being said, what kind of student would you say is the right fit for MSU?
I mean, I think so. That's an interesting, I saw that earlier as far as a question, and I thought to myself, I think it's an interesting question, right? Because I think for me, I think students that are a good fit at MSU are students who feel like they are going to thrive in the environment in the community. And that's something that I push to students all the time. Um, you know, Prior to the pandemic, when we could meet in person and we had, prospective students and admitted students coming to campus, the biggest thing I told, and I still tell my admitted students, even though, right, we've been sort of meeting virtually for the past year and a half or so, um, is that, what's sad to me is that this past year has sort of taken away that ability for someone to go to a campus and sort of
Right.
get their feet on the ground and sort of get a feel for it. Because for me, right, the biggest reason I chose my law school when I was picking a law school was because it was when I went where I felt most comfortable in the environment in the community. And there were other schools that I looked at that I thought, on paper, this is where I want to be. And when I went to visit, it was like, I can't see myself here. And
Wow.
so my biggest advice and what I tell my admitted students is, if I admitted you, I want you as part of our community. But I think just because I think you're a good fit for our community doesn't mean that you're going to think you're a good fit for our community. And at the end of the day, really, that's, I think, one of the biggest pieces that should be leading a decision-making process is, where am I comfortable in the environment and the community? Because at the end of the day, what I tell admitted students is, if you don't feel comfortable in the environment or the community, it's a terrible way to spend 3 years. It's stressful. Law school is stressful enough, right? And if you are miserable in the fact that this is not where you want to be, but you're there because maybe we gave you the most money, or maybe, your parents were pushing you to go there, or whatever that looks like, then I don't think you're truly setting yourself up for the greatest amount of success. And at the end of the day, anybody who's going to law school is going to be entering into a profession that I'm part of. Our profession needs a lot of help. The world in general needs a lot of help. And so I want students to go to law school where they have that comfort and they feel, right, that they're going to get the greatest amount of success out of the environment and the community that a law school is offering to them, so that they can go out and make the change that's necessary, not only in our world, but right in our profession, and hit the ground running. So,
Sure.
I think that's really, to me, just because I think someone looks good doesn't mean they're going to feel like they're going to, right, it's going to be a good fit for them. And so I think the best student for MSU is someone who feels like MSU is the place where I'm going to get the most out of my law school experience, as far as academics, as far as environment, as far as community, and I'm going to be able to go out and make the change that's necessary, when I graduate. I think that's
Right.
the best.
In that professional career. I mean, it really takes me back. You're sticking true to exactly, what we mentioned in your bio, like that MSU isn't just looking at how are you going to perform in school, but how does that act as a platform for what you're going to do after.
Right. Correct.
And it sounds like what I'm hearing from you in terms of that communal, like the weight of community, which is such an interesting topic. And I'm not going to go down this road, quite the way you touched on it, in terms of the way we've been put in sort of like an incubator in this last year to year and a half. So I think that's it's such a interesting viewpoint that I'm not sure I'm talking about enough, when I'm in the rooms with applicants, because I think, as you touched on, an applicant can say, the parents want me to go here, T14, T6. There's a lot of sort of like terms that are being thrown about. And that's definitely, I think, what you've just brought up in terms of that comfort level and those people that you're surrounding yourself with. I think that that's actually something that I'm excited to examine when I'm in the room with applicants, kind of like weighing out those options. Thank you. I've never heard that option, that actual answer before.
Well, I'm glad I'm different.
Yeah, thank you. That is really great. I really am going to chew on that actually after this interview, and I can tell I am. So, talking about the admissions process, kind of, you can choose how to answer this, but some people, there's a debate like, how do you process an application? Some people are like, I love to look at the resume first. I want to get a picture and then I dive into the person. Some people are the other way around. What would you say? Maybe you don't have to go too personal, but what's general process?
Yeah. So for me, when I'm looking at an application, I honestly start with the personal statement, because I want to get the voice right immediately, as much as I can, through that personal statement of the applicant, and what it is they're looking to do with, right,
Mm,
their law school experience, and then, right, their future goals down the road. And then I go to the resume. And it's interesting, my goal in that is sort of to see if, is the resume a regurgitation, or is the personal statement a regurgitation of their resume? And I'm hoping it's not, right? Because that's not going to give me more information about somebody. Um, and so I go from, right, resume then to letters of recommendation, or, well, I guess it depends on if there are any optional statements or addenda that somebody has submitted. I read those, right? Then I go to letters of recommendation. I sort of finish out, right, with letters of recommendation, along with looking at, right, GPA trends, LSAT, how many times have they taken it, what their trending has been looking like, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And so, but I always start with that personal statement. That's sort of like my first go-to in the review process, because I feel like it either can start the process off on the right foot, or it can sort of start you down the wrong path of thinking we're already not on a good, right, this isn't starting well, let's see how they finish it, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's a huge reflection starting out. And this is your personal process. I've heard
Right.
different answers from different admissions officers, but I think that there's something to be said that someone out there is starting with a personal statement. And I think that that reflects back to what you mentioned about taking your time to put together a thoughtful application. If somebody is expecting to open up your application and read this one piece of material that you've presented and be wanting to get to know you from this, quite frankly, like really like short, there's not a ton there's a lot of opportunity there. Of course, I wouldn't
Right.
say that, but I think that there has to be purposeful is what I'm trying to
Right.
say. That's what I'm hearing from you as well. You mentioned kind of, maybe like you somehow end up down the line of looking at someone's application, looking at a letter of recommendation. I've heard before that, say someone's application, maybe things are like on the fence for whatever reason. There could be a multitude of reasons. I won't ever pretend to understand. Like, I know it's a holistic process. So say someone's on the fence. What a letter of recommendation, is there potential there to push that person one way or the other? Has that ever happened before?
Yes, definitely. And that's why I strongly encourage applicants, right? Now, well, for us, right, to get letters from people who can speak to your work ethic and work product and give examples of those things. I think the examples part is the biggest piece, because what I see a lot of times are letters of recommendation coming from professors who basically say, you know, John Doe was in my class. He came to class. He talked during, question and answers. He got an A. That doesn't tell me anything. I saw that on your transcript that you got an A in there. Like, that tells me nothing. Right. So a better letter would be from someone who can say, John Doe was in my class. In this class, we wrote, numerous documents, right, where there was research involved in writing, and the writing was something where he would get feedback and implement the feedback and turn another copy in, right, because that's what you're going to be doing in law school, right? So I like those kinds of letters, and it doesn't have to be from someone where you're doing a lot of writing, but where they can give hardcore examples of things you've done in class where the skills are going to translate into what you're going to do into law school. So critical thinking, reasoning, research and writing, right? All of the logical, reasoning and questioning, all of those things. If you can get letters from a professor who says that, and now also don't, and this goes, to a question that I might be jumping ahead, right? But for our non-traditional students, at least for MSU law, we don't require students to get letters from professors, right? Because I don't want to put anybody into a box where they feel like they have to go ask a professor to get a letter when they might not have good relationships with their professors for some reason or another, right? They might be working full-time and going to school, so they literally go to class and they leave, right? And so it's hard to create relationships when you're in that type of setting. So don't feel like it has to come from a professor. But on the flip side, right, if someone's going to be writing a letter where they're giving examples of your work ethic and product, then it's probably going to be coming from a professional, right? Someone you've worked for, an employer. So I always say stay away from what I call the celebrity letters, which is if your dad's best friend is a senator, or your best friend is dad is an attorney, right? If you haven't worked for them and you're just getting a letter that they're going to say, this person's a great person, we're expecting everybody to be great people that are applying. So I'm not really looking for character references as much as I am, give me those examples, and those kinds of letters where there are examples of work ethic and work product are the letters that sometimes, right, pop that person onto the other side if they were on the fence. So
Great. Well, I mean, just such valuable information, especially for those non-traditional students, where what I'm getting at it, what I'm hearing from you is that if somebody can just tell the truth, maybe their own experience, maybe because I've been in a Zoom room of panic of, I have XYZ, or I've been out of school for this long, or there's a lot of variation in terms of what a single individual's experience can be. And I'm excited right now because I'm like, I want to just kind of scream from the mountaintops, like, hey, everyone, look at MSU. If you can clearly communicate how your skill sets are translatable and like you can get a recommender to do that, then that's great. That's
yeah.
a really good start. And you don't have to, pull tricks, get a celebrity, get a professor. There are ways to get your law school application in a strong, get it to be in a strong standing without maybe like feeling like you have to do the sort of like that mental like barrier, like what I think that a lot of applicants are thinking, just do the work. And I think what I'm hearing from you also is like, I'll hear occasionally from an applicant, like, okay, have you talked to your recommenders? Are you going to get your letter of recommendation in? And they're like, yeah, it's great. And did that, it's good to go. And I'll sort of pose the question to them. Is it like, have you had a conversation with what they might write about you, or did you just ask them to do it? They said yes. And for you, like, that's kind of done. So what would you suggest? Like, do you suggest that people have a conversation of like, would you be able or comfortable to sort of mention XYZ? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, this is hard, right? Because I think, in my opinion or in my mind, you should know whether or not you have a good enough relationship with the professor where they're probably going to write examples and not just give you this basic John Doe was in my class, he did great, he got an A, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the relationship building is important. And so this is what I want to scream from the mountaintops for anybody, right, who's thinking about law school, whether they're an undergrad or they're a non-traditional student that's out there in the professional world. Build relationships, right? Build relationships with individuals who you have a connection with, who you want to learn from, and those are the people that then you should be asking for letters, because if you have a strong relationship with them, they're going to write you a good letter. You don't have to tell them to write you a good letter. They're going to put examples in the letter of recommendation. They're going to make it as strong as possible because they have that connection with you. So build the relationships with your professors if you're an undergrad, right? And that's going to be important once you get to law school, right? Go and see your professors, right? They're there to help you. That's what their job is, and that's what they love doing. So take advantage of them if you're an undergrad now, and take advantage of them when you get to law school.
Nice.
And again, if you're a professional or in a professional setting, right, build relationships with individuals who you want to learn more about your profession from, even if you're thinking you're going to go in a different direction, right, for as far as going to law school.
Wow.
You can still build key relationships with those individuals who then, like I said, could potentially write you a letter that gets you admitted versus not not getting admitted because you have that strong letter from that person or two people, right? So just, I think building relationships is key, and a lot, again, my personal opinion, I feel like a lot of people are missing that now in the younger generations that are coming up behind us. You know, I hate it, but it's a weird saying, but it's a true saying that it's not what you know sometimes, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that things are going to be handed to you, but the more people you know, as far as networking opportunities and that carries itself. That's how people get jobs, right? Because they're looking for something, and this person knows this person, and this person knows this person, and they say, hey, you're looking for this job, well, there's an opening, apply, right? Doesn't mean you're going to get the job, but at least you have these outlets. It's the same kind of thought process, I think, that people should be putting into, right, building the relationships now for letters of recommendation, and not just for letters of recommendation, but again, sometimes those relationships come back to help you 10 years, 20 years down the road. So it's not just a relationship to build to get a letter of recommendation. It's supposed to be a relationship that could potentially help you out down the road, you
Right.
know, 10, 20 years from now. So, and be kind to people, treat people with respect. Those are big things. A little bit off topic, but, sort of on the same sort of subject. My dad was in management. This was 20, 30 years ago, had an employee who worked for him. My dad, was a great manager. And then he basically got to the top of this company. They got bought out. He lost his job. When he was looking for a job, his past employee, who he was a supervisor for, was now a supervisor at another company and hired my dad, right? And it's because of relationships like that, right, that it helps you down the road regardless, right? So I think building relationships is key. And I'm hoping that's what people are doing.
Powerful. That is powerful. And you know what, in just by sharing sort of what you've been sharing with me, I've sort of this sense of what a letter of recommendation is has sort of like flipped itself in my mind. Whereas maybe potentially I was viewing it as like, okay, like you have to have someone else basically speak for you or prove that
Right.
you can do it. But what I'm really realizing now is that that is a translatable skill in itself, that if you've taken the time to build a relationship from a professional in a professional setting, that this person now is willing to speak on your behalf, then that also will translate directly to the kind of, say, like how you're going to be developing relationships while in school and as a professional, as an alumni of that school. I mean, it's sort of really, if you can have that relationship, then you're the kind of person who will be willing to invest that. And you'll probably, have more opportunities in your career. Definitely speaks to your level of professionalism.
Yeah.
Powerful. Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
so fantastic. So you already touched base on a little bit on non-traditional students. It sounds like, especially considering that MSU doesn't formally like 100% require professor letters of recs. So I'm going to go ahead and say you support non-traditional students. Definitely sounds like you're welcoming to them. What would you say, I don't know if you have a percentage off the top of your head, roughly any sort of like incoming class, like the last incoming class of non-traditional students?
Yeah, and I guess it depends on how you define non-traditional, right? So our incoming class average age is typically right around 24. So if you think about it, right, most students who are graduating from undergrad, if they do the traditional, right, 4 years, they started when they were 17, 18, you're looking at coming out when you're 21, 22. So, we typically, I would say maybe about 50% of our incoming class is coming straight from undergrad, and about 50% is probably a year or more out of undergrad.
Nice.
And an age range, we typically have a 50 or a 60-year-old in our class. I would say that's sort of the top end. But then a good sort of grouping of anywhere from late 20s into their early 30s, and then a little bit more as you get up into the 40s and the 50s.
Sure.
But we love our traditional students. It's funny to me because I have had conversations over the past 8.5 years with non-traditional students, and it feels like they're always the same conversation, which is I find that non-traditional students, not all, but a lot of them are so scared about coming back into the educational setting and being worried that they're going to be behind the students who are coming straight from undergrad.
Yeah.
And what I've seen over my 8.5 years is that typically the non-traditional students are kicking butt.
Nice.
You know, they are ending up towards the top of their class. They are putting the time and effort in. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that, right, being in a professional setting, sort of being out there in the quote unquote real world, if you will, because you're working and you're paying bills and right, you're not in, and I'm not saying people don't do that when they're in undergrad, but it's not as I think intense, and you're not getting as real of sort of that real life experience until you're out of undergrad, right? And you're working a full-time job and you've got, bills. And if you have debt from undergrad, you're paying, your debt back and all of that kind of thing. Um, uh, they're better at time management, right? Non-traditional students are. Time management is huge in law school. And they just have had some additional experiences that I think really help them in the fast-paced, more rigorous setting of law school. Again, that doesn't mean that there aren't students coming straight from undergrad that don't kick butt as well, because there are. But I always hear this fear from non-traditional students of feeling like they're going to struggle. And I would say 9 times out of 10, it's the opposite, right, of what they're feeling. So it's almost like they have this anxiety about nothing because they come in and they do so well, because
Yeah.
they put their nose to the ground and basically get what's done that needs to be done. So
Right. I have the same experience whenever I'm talking to a non-traditional student, that does come up. And it starts out from a place of fear. And so I know that for me, in a lot of my materials, I keep a little note card that says paper tigers, just to remind me, is this really going on, or is this a paper tiger? And anyone who's listening to this, I recommend that you just keep a random note card around that says the same thing. And I think it helps kind of snap you back into the reality of what you're saying, that, non-traditional student, if they're taking the time to make that life decision for themselves, they're going to most likely, get the best bang for their buck and their time, right? Like they're really investing in that on purpose. Like that's a very much so like a conscious decision. So I can see where that comes into play in their education. Definitely. I have a little bit of a like an asterisk question on this topic that's just super specific to someone I was just recently speaking with. They're a non-traditional applicant, and they are very successful in their career. They have put in a lot of time, they've invested that, and they've sort of like, climbed up into their field of work. Is there ever any concern that if someone's kind of like at the top maybe, or higher up in their line of work, that they're not going to be a great team player, or they're not going to be great when it comes to, say, like those internships, clinics, maybe summer, anything like that, activities?
I don't think so. I mean, let's be honest. There's always going to be a couple of people in any class, right? I saw it when I was in law school. I see it now, right, in the admissions world, in all the classes that I brought in over the past 8.5 years. There's always going to be a couple of people who aren't great team players and don't want anything to do with, the rest of their classmates or, right, the community as a whole. And I don't think necessarily that's always a bad thing, right? I think having those individuals and their experiences and their background in the class is important just as much as having the team players in the classes, right?
Nice.
What I hope is that at the end of 3 years, the non-team players sort of realize that, oh, I need to play a little bit. Maybe I don't have to, right, get full blown into it because that's just not who I am as a person. Um, but I hope that they learn a little bit, right, from the team players, and the team players learn a little bit from them. I also think that the great thing about the legal industry and the profession is that there are positions for people who aren't necessarily team players, right?
Sure, yeah, there's still
Um,
need for
that
that.
that great opportunities and great experiences that fit their personality and how it is that they like to work best. So, again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing
Mm,
if someone's coming in, or if maybe there's this fear of having that happen, because again, I think they're going to they're going to end up doing something in the legal profession if that's how they decide to use their Juris Doctor, right? That is going to fit their personality and their style of teamwork. And if they get into a job or a profession that doesn't, they're going to find out quickly, right? And the person who hired them is going to find out quickly, and they might find that they don't have a job anymore, right? Because
yeah,
can't be in a job that requires teamwork and being a team player if you're not a team player. So
right.
but again, I do think there are those jobs out there where being a team player isn't required. It is this is what you need to do, you come in, you do it, and so that's going to fit those people.
What I love about this is that I think it's sort of taking this mystique out of maybe like definitely like MSU, but a law school education of where it's not this imaginary land where everyone has to fit into a very specific box. It just sounds like, when we're talking about non-traditional students, when we're talking about certain characteristics, like of course there are certain skills that are going to be assets, like that doesn't go away, but there's a lot of variation. And that's what I love kind of about this conversation right now is that if you're authentic to yourself and the school accepts you and you feel comfortable in the community there and it's a great fit, then there's going to be something out of it. Like there's going to be something can definitely suit you. So that's really great actually. Okay, so let's talk about life as a law student at MSU. So, favorite question for all of the anxiety ridden or maybe confident, kind of. I don't know if you've seen on Twitter lately, but there was a discourse where a lot of people are calling themselves 0L, and whether or not and, and in your 8.5 years of admissions, not sure if you've heard about this 0L kind of cultural reset of whether that exists or not, but nonetheless, what should someone expect in their 1L here, their first year?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should expect to be very busy, to not have too much of a life. Doesn't mean you can't have a life, right? But you're not going to have the life that you used to have. That's something that my family found out very quickly. Something family, friends, I mean, found out very quickly. I wasn't necessarily going to respond immediately like I used to. I wasn't going to be able to pick up on a whim and go to a wedding or go fly home and see my family.
Definitely.
Things had to be planned out. So I think what you should expect your first year, and I don't think this is um, only for MSU. I think it's for most law school experiences, is that you're going to be very busy. And but here's what I will say. I always say, going back to reinventing the wheel, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel your first year of law school. A lot of people, I feel like, come in and think, oh, I need to figure out how to do X, Y, and I need to figure out how to outline for this class, right?
I was just talking about that. It's so funny.
You know, if that is how you learn and study best, go for it, right? I knew people who made their own outlines. Was I one of them? No, right? I got outlines from upperclassmen who had my same professors. I never once wrote my own outline. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't take that outline and reinvent it so that I could utilize it in the way that I learn and study best, right? Um, but you definitely don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to those things. You also I don't think shouldn't reinvent the wheel when it comes to studying and right how you learn best, because we're all different. There are some people who treat law school first year, second year, third year as an 8 to 5 job. They come in at 8 o'clock, they don't leave until 5 o'clock, they go home at 5 o'clock, and they don't do anything law school related. That was not me in law school, right? And that worked for those people, right?
Mhm.
I was more of a 7 to 11 kind of guy.
Yeah.
And that's what worked for me, right? And now I would take breaks, right? And it wasn't always nonstop law school stuff from 7 to 11. Um, but I did what I had to do to get what I needed done in that specific day. And if it went outside of the hours of 8 to 5, like some of those people, which for me, it always did, then that's what I had to do. Your first year of law school, it's really honestly hard to explain, right? I always say it's until you get there, it really is hard to exactly pinpoint like this is what it's like, but it is very time consuming. You are basically, it's almost like learning a new language because you're reading things that are in English, but you have no idea what's going on, right?
I've
Um,
heard something like that. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's crazy. So lots of reading, and that equates into lots of time. Um, and I would read cases my first year of law school sometimes 2 to 3 times to try and understand what was going on. And even then I didn't truly understand, but that's okay, right? Because
Yeah.
then you go to class and you talk it out with your professors and you figure it out, right? So totally fine, but you definitely need to prepare and read the cases. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble when you get to class. So lots of work, lots of time. I think the big thing of the one exam, now there are some schools out there that they have midterms now, or there is some kind of progress sort of check-in or report.
Yeah.
We traditionally are still, for the most part, there are some professors that do a midterm, but for the most part, most professors are still only doing the one exam, determines your whole grade. That freaks people out.
Right.
Um,
I was,
it, it's yeah, it's one of those things where I always say in undergrad I would pull an all-nighter and study the night before for my exam. That's not how it is in law school. If you do that, then and I probably have known some people who have done that and did okay, but the majority of people can't pull that off in a law school exam.
sure. Sure. Yeah. You know what? And for anyone like me, will be a first generation, law school student. So I actually didn't realize what was going on when I first started to listen into admissions sort of interviews. But what Ian's just mentioned about, sort of that midterm or that progress bar is my understanding personally is that if someone if you're in a course, if you're taking a course and there's no sort of progress check-in where a grade is given by that professor until the very, very end of the course exam, if you don't know that you're not understanding material or you're not able to like communicate it or have these sorts of like if you're not able to sort of grasp what that class may be requesting of you and you don't find out until the final exam, that may be cause for trouble. Like that might not have the outcome that you wanted to have, which I had no idea that that was even how law school worked, but that I believe that that's what sort of you're referring to. It's not a
Right.
scary thing, but then that's where like that prioritizing comes in that you're talking about in terms of like creating a system that works for yourself, because it sounds like there's a lot of ownership like that you have to take over your own experience.
Right. Oh, for sure. And going sort of back to building the relationships, that's where going and seeing your professors, right? Your check-ins are going to their office hours, or for our professors are really good about open door policy. If they're in their office, come in our office, let's talk, right? But
Wow.
going in and saying, here's where we're at in, this point in time in the semester, here's what I've been getting out of everything that we've been learning in class. Am I on the right track? They're going to tell you yes or no. And it's better to do that earlier in the semester rather than towards the end, because if you're towards the end, that's a bad time to find out that you have not been really understanding the material up until that point. And I think it's going to really then make that final exam, which determines your grade for the course, that much more difficult.
Yeah,
So
it's incredible too to kind of go back to that skill set. And of course, nobody likes saying the phrase like the younger generation. Like, I mean, like, I don't appreciate saying that, I don't want to say that. I'm close to 30, so I'm just now starting to say that, it's just kind of coming up for me in my life. But when you talk about that relationship building, I heard once, you're ready to go to law school when you can like advocate for yourself, or like when you can have those conversations and walk up to someone and say like, this is where I'm at, and have those sorts of check-ins. So I really appreciate that this conversation has kind of like come full circle to that, to just emphasize that that's actually like a good thing. It's something you want to have on your side. And so, I know that you said it was hard to answer like what to expect in the first year, but what I'm really hearing is expect to have to take ownership over your own experience, expect to have to be able to prioritize yourself, like where you spend your time, prioritize also your self-knowledge of like, how do I learn versus somebody else, how do they learn? If anybody takes yoga, like keep your eyes on your own mat, kind of. And also how to, I think, this is really lame. Like this is also like trademarked by one of the LSAT test prep books, but like they're calling like, you have to like leap over uncertainty. Like you have to sort of be willing to be persistent in terms of like, you just mentioned, like you would sometimes it may have been true that you read a case 2 to 3 times. And then we're still walking into that room. Like, I'm gonna have to like keep, I watch a lot of soccer, and sometimes if they try to score a lot of goals and it's not going in, the commentator will say, just keep knocking on that door.
Right.
And I love that in terms of like what you're mentioning. So I think that's what somebody could expect in their first year.
And also know that if you are struggling, right, and you are having a hard time of putting all this stuff together, we have resources, right? Most law schools have resources, and that's another big piece of advice I always give anybody who talks to me about law school, whether they're an admitted student or prospective applicant down the road, is seek out help, right? We have resources. We have an academic success program. We have who does programming just on those kinds of time management and how do I outline and what do exams look like and those kinds of things. But take advantage of those resources at the school you end up in, because that's what those people are there for. They want to help you. Our goal is not to bring, law school used to be, and I'll go back maybe 20, 25 years ago, sort of this, still the paper chase thought of look left, look right. There's only one of you that's going to be here after the first year, right?
Yeah.
They brought in people, they weeded people out. You were left with a class of whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Our goal is not to do that, right? Our goal is the class we bring in, we expect to graduate in 3 years and go out and be productive members of the profession, whether they're practicing on a day-to-day basis or not, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's another big piece is it's going to be hard your first year, but you've got tons of people rooting for you and that are here to help you. And so take advantage of those things.
Incredible. Truly incredible. It's this sort of like the dance of taking ownership of oneself and also just communicating and utilizing all that the school has to offer. It sounds like you have resources for first generation students as well. I know that comes up a lot, like, and there's a lot to be said in terms of like the way that people are using the internet, using Twitter, using Reddit, where and just a reminder, I think, you know, a lot of people would agree that somebody who's taking the time to write on Twitter, to write on Reddit, those are most likely going to be extreme cases. And I'm talking about like coming from places of like, there's, you know, quite a lot of noise out there of like, if you don't have parents that are lawyers, you're walking into a disaster, you know, kind of. But I love the point that you bring up about utilizing resources. That support system is there on purpose, you know, go in and use it.
Right. Yeah. And you know, bring up a good point about first gen students, regardless of how you define first gen, right? Are you a first gen law student, or are you just a first generation undergrad, right? Professional school, whatever that looks like. Because sometimes people do define themselves as a first generation law school student, right? Their parents went to undergrad, but that was it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I didn't have any immediate family who had gone beyond undergraduate work. So law school for me was, I was navigating everything on my own.
Mm.
And, you know, not only that navigation, but coming from a background, I was, you know, a business administration major, financial services. That was my sort of background, numbers. That was my thing. And
Wow.
so, you know, there's this huge myth out there too of, well, I have to be some kind of specific major, or I have to take pre-law classes, or I have to do X, Y, and Z, or I have to work in a law firm before I go to law school because that looks good.
Yeah.
No, you don't. Right?
Awesome.
You know, I didn't do any of those things. I went to law school. I did fine in law school. I passed the Florida bar the first time, right? You can do law. If law school is something that you're passionate about and you want to be able to have that degree to advocate for individuals, regardless of whether you're advocating as an attorney or right in some other line of work where you're still advocating for individuals, then that's where the passion should lie, right? Is this
Mm.
what I want to do? And if it is, don't worry about what background you're coming from, or right the things that you don't think you have that other people have, because everybody, once they get to law school, is on a level playing field. And the people who come from backgrounds where parents are attorneys and this and that, that doesn't help them. And I mean, I can tell you pretty emphatically that there are people that come into law school who think they have this leg up because they were a pre-law major, or because, right, they have family members who are attorneys, and they find out really quickly that that's not helping them, right?
There-
So I think that's the great thing about law school is once people get to law school, everybody's on a level playing field,
Wow.
right?
You've sort of like, you've just torn down like even things that I've come across. Like, you're right. Like that sort of fear of like, I need to study XYZ. Or I've heard people before say like, oh, if you're a numbers person, they're not going to accept you into law school. Like you're not. And I love it. Because you're sort of smashing down the things that I've personally come across, like these rooms that I've been in where people are talking up to the exact points that you're bringing up. I mean, I'm not surprised. You've been working at admissions for 8.5 years. So you're sort of touching on these like cyclical conversation topics that do arrive, you know, even earlier when you brought up the study schedule in law school. I had like a friend of a friend, someone's uncle. They're like, oh yeah, he, you know, studied at law school Monday through Friday. As soon as Friday was up, Saturday and Sunday, he just spent time with his family. And of course, those sorts of extreme stories sort of like stick with you. And it can be easy for that to sort of seep in your mind and say, well, if I'm not doing that, am I doing something wrong? You know, or there's just so much that you've pointed to that I hope that anyone listening can sort of see the potential for individuality is really there. And also your resources. I don't want to let this interview wrap up without mentioning that the MSU website that to apply comes with an application toolkit. Like you can click on this link and I've done quite a bit of interviews. I've looked at a lot of schools, and I think it's actually kind of rare for on the website for this sort of accessibility to be like so right there out in the open, where there you have resume tips, you have personal statement tips, you have exactly what you're looking for. So I want to encourage anyone. I mean, I hate to say, whether you're applying to MSU or not, there's a really great resources going on there. Like, you weren't joking. Like, you guys you're the real deal in terms of really wanting someone to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I always say I, I work for MSU, right? But at the end of the day, I'm building future attorneys or future advocates that are going, like I said earlier, going to be part of the profession that I'm a part of.
Mhm.
And regardless of whether they come to us or go to another school, right? That that doesn't bother me, right? Because again, I feel like if they're going to another school, that's a better fit for them. It's going to help them reach the goals and succeed in the areas that they want to succeed in, more so than maybe if they decided they wanted to come to us. And everybody is an individual. Everybody has different experience. Everybody has different feelings and fits that work for them. And so, for me, it is if I can be a resource, regardless of whether it's about MSU or just law school in general, that's what I see my job as. Because I want, again, I go back to the fact that the profession as a whole has a lot of work to do, right? And we need advocates who are ready to hit the ground running to help make that change in our profession, but also just the world in general. Our world needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
And attorneys are not the only people who, right, can help make those changes, but they have, right, such a good knowledge base and a degree that helps them truly be able to impact, right, change sometimes in ways that others who don't have that degree can.
Right.
And so I think that's what's important, right? Is yes, I work for MSU Law. I work for the admissions office. My goal is to bring in, right, a class, right, that represents not only our nation, right, but
Mhm.
those who need advocates. Um, and I do that, but I also want it to be a part of my mission to be able to help anybody, regardless of whether they come to us or not. Because, you know, I always use this as an example. If you're interested in, say, we'll just use animal law as an example, and you apply to all schools that don't have any animal law classes, are you really putting yourself in a good position, right, for reaching your future goals? I don't think so, right? So when you're doing research, look at what kind of courses are offered, right? Look at those kinds of things because it might be that your top 3 schools that you're admitted to, it comes down to it, and only one of them has animal law classes. If animal law is something that you're really passionate about, I'm not saying you couldn't potentially get into animal law if you went to one of the other 2 schools that don't have courses in that area. But
Mhm.
having coursework in an area of law that you truly are passionate about and have an interest in, I think is going to set you up for greater success potentially down the road than being somewhere where you can't even take a class in an area of law that you're interested in. So those
Yeah.
are things that, I think everybody should be looking at, everybody should be thinking about. Um, but really, if it's to come to us or to go to another school, again, if I can be a resource, and I know the rest of my team feels the same way, right? So if anybody in my office can be a resource for anybody that's listening, we're more than happy to be. So don't feel shy of picking up the phone or sending us an email because we're more than happy to help anybody that's going down this path. It's a lot, and you know
I love that
it
in
can be
terms of
daunting.
yeah, it can be daunting. And even as much ground as you and I have covered just in this evening and talking, still in my mind, there's so many questions. And hopefully if you have a minute, I'll just sort of ask maybe one or two student
Yeah.
questions. For example, in my mind, somebody might ask, they might talk to me and say, what if I'm thinking about transferring? What do I do? And the first thing I say to them is like, email that school. Go call that admissions office. Like they want to talk to you. And somebody might ask me about, what about early decision? Like, and I'm like, go email that school, go call that school. And that's what I'm hearing from you as well. With both of those things, you guys are there to help. You
Right.
you really want to have those conversations with them.
Yeah. And I think we're starting, I mean, we'll see how things go, but a lot of schools this fall are going to be in person again. They're going to be offering tours again. So if you're in the area, or if you can get to the area, right, go and visit those schools, especially for schools that have early decision binding programs. If you're thinking about going down that path and applying to schools that have those types of early programs, you really want to make sure that's where you want to be, right? So I think visiting, or if you can't visit, calling, talking to somebody, asking if you can talk to a current student, asking if you can talk to an alum, asking if you can talk to a professor, right? Make contacts with individuals that make up the community at that individual school, because really, at the end of the day, you want to, if you can't visit, your goal is to try and get as much of a feel for the community as possible. And so talking to different individuals across the board, and not just somebody from admissions, right, I think is the best thing to do. But definitely with transferring, that kind of process, right, individuals should talk to somebody in the admissions office. And I think most people who are thinking about transferring are thinking about transferring to certain schools because it's a school they wanted to be at in the first place, but either were waitlisted and didn't get in, or were denied and didn't get in. And so they think this transfer process is potentially, right, their path into the school that they wanted to be at initially because of academics or because of X, Y, and Z. So, but yeah, pick up the phone, call us. But definitely, if you can, now that things are starting to open back up, and we're going to start being back in the office in August here. Come and see us if you're in the area.
Awesome. It goes back to that. I know that it is really daunting to say, what do I say? What questions do I ask? Like when you mention contact with the community, what's really going on there, just think of it as an investment in yourself. Every time you make that touch, every time you make that contact, you're just sort of practicing a skill set, really, that,
Right.
and just investing in yourself, making sure it's the right program for you. So
Correct.
definitely
Yep.
recommend that. Do you have time for maybe like 1 to 2
for sure
questions from students?
Of
All right.
course.
So, okay, awesome. And let's go. So first one, do you have resources for students with disabilities?
Yes. So a lot of people don't know this about us, but up until about a year and a half ago, well, no, a year ago, wasn't a year and a half ago, we were actually a private law school on the campus of a public institution. So our name was Michigan State University College of Law, and we reside on the campus of Michigan State, but we were technically a private institution, so we didn't receive funds from the state, right? Anything of that nature. We were basically privately funded. We fully integrated with Michigan State last August. So now we are MSU, right? We are a state public law school. So with that comes, and we already worked, because we were basically a private school, we were affiliated, right? Our students still had access to the resources that MSU as a whole had.
Wow.
But now it sort of just made them a little more voluminous than before. And so, yes, we work with our Office of Student Affairs at the law school, works with anybody that has disability requests or accommodation requests, and basically puts them in contact with MSU's overall office that handles disabilities and resources and accommodations. So, and actually the liaison for the university at the main Disability Resource Center is a law grad and a fantastic, right now it's fantastic because our students coming in get to work with him, and he, right, received his Juris Doctor from MSU Law. So yes, we have great resources there.
Great. I don't think there's any better, I don't want to say advertisement, but I think it says something when alumni wants to come back and work at this school. Definitely makes it seem like something going on that's good there. Let's see. We've really come down. Last question. This has to do with the law school admissions test.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation, sort of taking a look, what are they trending? How many times have they taken it? So I definitely get the sense that that's something you at least look at, right? In terms of the holistic view of an applicant. Talking about disabilities or talking about accommodations, are approved accommodations by the Law School Admissions Council looked down upon?
No. And honestly, I believe we don't see if anybody has received accommodation. So, no, it's not looked down upon. I think there's this stigma, right, that if somebody has gotten accommodations, that the only reason they did so well is because of that accommodation. And I think science sort of tells us the opposite, right? Which is, right, clearly, if there's a diagnosed issue that's going on, that science has said them getting extra time or them getting this or them getting that, right, is not any different than someone who doesn't have that same disability or that need for accommodation would be doing. So no, right? That's not something that, when I'm looking at scores, I look at scores and I basically move on. Now, if somebody tells me in their statement, right, or in an addendum that this was going on, this is maybe a reason for why my LSAT score was less. I've had students who have said, for instance, I tried to get accommodations through the Law School Admission Council, but I didn't get them in time, or I didn't get this right in time. And then I was able to get them the second time. So that's why you see such a jump in my score. Giving that context is helpful sometimes, because my advice usually as to when an applicant should write an addendum regarding the LSAT is if they've taken the LSAT two times or more, right, and their score has gone up 5 points or more. On average, I think an LSAT score goes up maybe 2-3 points, right? Now, obviously, there are bigger jumps. We've seen bigger jumps. But when there are bigger jumps than that 2 to 3 points, and I usually say 5 just because it sort of gets you out of that scoring band for the most part.
Yeah, that common sort of fluctuation.
Correct. Yeah. But up or down more than 5 points, then give me some context as to why you think you went up more than 5 points, or why you went down more than 5 points if, God forbid, you go down, right? That sometimes happens. But I hear a lot from applicants that, oh, I feel like I'm making an excuse because my grandfather died the night before, or because I got a flat tire on the way to the test when people were driving to the test,
Back in the day.
back in the day, right? But those kinds of things. And I say, no, honestly, it gives me more of a picture as to why your score looks like that. And it makes more sense, to be quite honest. When people jump 15 points, I'm like, what's going on? And then I see in an addendum, oh, well, I had the flu. Oh, well, the first time I took it. Well, that makes sense, right? Because not a clear mind. You definitely want to go into that test with as clear of a mind as possible. I think that's something. And while we're on the LSAT, I'll just throw this in. My advice also for anyone applying to law school is, if you've only taken the LSAT once and your score is at or below the medians for the schools that you're looking at, I would encourage you to strongly think about taking the test a second time, because the closer you can get to that median for us or for any other school that you're looking at, the more competitive when it comes to with respect to just the LSAT, right? The more competitive you're going to be with just that piece of the holistic process. So the goal is as competitive across the board as possible. But that means you want to make as many pieces of that holistic process as competitive as possible. So that's something to think about as well.
What a fantastic point. And it also just showcases that putting time in, right? Because you can't, typically it would not be, I think, typical to take the LSAT, back to back. It's definitely possible, but right, if you really put in the time, definitely shows effort, definitely shows that you have really dedicated time to that application process, which I could absolutely imagine showcases itself, so
Right.
what a great, I've never actually heard that either in terms of that specificity. And if cost is an option as well, anyone listening, the LSAC waiver gives you 2 tests, an opportunity to take 2 tests. I know I have the waiver myself, and so strategizing around making sure that those both count, definitely something to do. What a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. You have personally shattered assumptions in my own mind that I didn't even know I was holding on to, or just conversations that I've been in the room with, really a lot. And so that's been really helpful. Let's see. All right. Our chat is clean and is ready to go. Ian, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share the information with LSAT Unplugged, course members and other people outside of the course, whether you're listening on YouTube or Spotify. Is there a way that anyone can get in touch with you? Do you have an email or such?
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest way, because basically my email address is my last name. So McInnis, so the initial of my first name, @law.msu.edu. So that, or you can email admiss, ADMISS, @law.msu.edu, and that goes to the office as a whole. And if it's addressed to me, they'll send it my way.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been really educational, and good luck on the cycle almost starting. I know you mentioned it's starting. This cycle is going to end in a few weeks once you guys get back in there in the classroom. And so good luck to that, and to all the students starting out their 1L and getting out their applications.
I appreciate it, Alisa. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Ian. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.